Yo, NYU, what up, man? I'm happy to be here. This is one of the schools that when I was in high school I applied to and got rejected from. So, it's an honor to actually be here now on this side of it. But thank you, Shevaun. Thank you, Alfonso. With Shevaun, I remember being in Kosovo and meeting you in Kosovo. I know we were in 25 New Faces together, but that time was such a blur. I remember really breaking bread with you and getting to know you more in Kosovo. So, to be here on this side of the planet is a blessing. There's so much to talk about in regards to my path, my personal journey in art and photography and filmmaking. So we may bounce around a bit. If I start to get too abstract, feel free to kind of like pull me back. Please, to everybody here, feel free to ask me questions or to think of things you want to discuss. I may say something that you want to go deeper into. So yes, just feel free to ask me anything about my work, about my approach, the technical aspects of it, the metaphysical aspects of it, any of that. I think I should begin by talking a little bit about how I began. That may be a good way to kind of like a good introduction to why I even make the work I make. Well, it goes back to getting left back in the 8th grade. And when I got left back in 8th grade out in Long Island, the school I went to in Long Island, I was like, man, the school system is, I really wasn't feeling it, because I didn't feel like I was being taught anything about myself or anything about my history. The first thing that you learn as a black student really in like 2nd grade is that you were a slave, So you don't know anything about your history. You just kind of come up with this shot to your self-esteem from an early age. And for me, I wasn't so interested in school. I was never dumb or nothing, but I was not so interested. I was breakdancing and skateboarding. And I remember because of that, I ended up having to repeat the 8th grade. And this was a pivotal time for me because I joined something called the 5% Nation, which a lot of people don't know about. But the 5%ers gave me a foundation in education, and that's where I actually began to self-educate myself. These books that I was finding on 125th Street about hidden history or science, metaphysics, spirituality. This is how I began to self-educate myself. So, when you speak about me being a self-taught filmmaker, it really goes back to that, learning how to, develop appetite for knowledge and to find it and search it out on my own. And that was long before ever becoming an artist. So, we used to skateboard, we used to break dance, and I remember asking my mom, just for some reason saying, Mom, can you get me a camera? I really want a camera, because I felt like my life was so exciting that I just wanted to document it. Not even from like a documentary filmmaker standpoint, but just because I wanted to capture it as a memory. And there used to be a store called The Wiz. Before Best Buy and all of that, there was The Wiz. I'm born in 1985, by the way, so I'm an old man to most of y'all now. But The Wiz was where I went and got a camera. It was a Canon ES-190. It was one of those cameras that took the Hyatt cassette tapes. Nowadays, everybody got a camera if you got a smartphone. But back then, I was the only person in the crew that had a camera. So it felt empowering just to have that. And everything from doing graffiti, I was the lookout man, when my brothers were doing graffiti, but I was also filming it. Or when we were breakdancing, I was filming it, So year after year, I was accumulating footage of my life. And I still never considered myself a filmmaker. I just looked at it from a very, objective perspective of I'm just recording. This is stuff that I'm just capturing just as a memory. Later on, I took an elective in a community college, which is as far as my education went. I don't even have an associate's degree, but I was going to a community college and they had a editing suite with Final Cut Pro. And nobody knew how to use it, not even the professors, But one of the other students showed me the razor. He was like, yo, this is the razor tool. This is how you could cut a piece of video. I said, yo, you could cut video. Like, damn, like it was an epiphany for me. Like it was an explosion psychologically for me to understand that all of this material that I had recorded from the age of 14 to 19, now I could actually do something with it. And it opened me up to the idea of actually editing. During this time, I was becoming friends and brothers with some of the members of the Wu-Tang Clan, mainly a rapper named Masterclass and GZA. And this is because they themselves are 5%ers. So we didn't meet at like a show, a hip hop show or something. I met these brothers in the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. And, you know, we began, you know, becoming friends and playing chess a lot. And I was like making a project for that elective class that I was in. And I used all of Wu-Tang's music in it to score it. Because that film was supposed to be a cinematic film that you could just look at and get the story just from the visuals without any dialogue. So there was no dialogue in that project. But I used Wu-Tang's music in it. And when it was done, I gave it to some of them. And really, that's how it began. That was the first project I ever made, called The Absorption of Light. And I didn't bring it here because it's super, super rough, super raw. I'm a little like, nah. But, but yeah, that was the beginning. So I say all of that to let you know how I began as a filmmaker. And I began to take my filmmaking seriously around the age of 19. Later, I became a photographer more around the age 25. So, you know, that's a whole different story. I'll tell that story pretty quickly, though, because really in the beginning, I didn't understand that these were two different businesses or even two different art forms. I just looked at it as all visual arts. You know what I mean? The motion picture camera and the still photography camera, to me, were the same thing. But later on, as I developed and got into the business of it, I began to see it's two different worlds. It's like a Venn diagram, though, and where they overlap, that's kind of where I exist as an artist. So we'll get deeper into that as this presentation gets along. But with the photography, I remember GZA, you know, from Wu-Tang, was coming out to Long Island where I live at, and I had just finished a 4-year film with a man who's now deceased. His name is Popa Wu. He's kind of like the spiritual advisor, or like the, what can I say, like the father figure to many of the Wu-Tang Clan members. He's RZA, GZA, and Old Dirty Bastard's older cousin. So he was a mentor of mine and an older brother to me personally, and I began making a film with him. But it took 4 years, and also he was 30 years older than me, you know, so he was kind of like a drill sergeant. It was kind of hard to work with him, you know what I mean? And when that film took 4 years, and when it was done, I was like, yo, no more filmmaking. I don't want to make a film again. I just want to chill out. But then there was this urge to still express myself creatively, and that's when photography came into my life, because I figured, okay, I can make a picture, I can make a film in a fraction of a second. So, you know, GZA was coming to Long Island this day, and for some reason, I just asked my brother, can I borrow your camera? You know, he had like a Canon Rebel still camera. I said, can I borrow that? And he was like, I don't let people borrow my shit, man. So I was like, yo, I'm your brother. Let me borrow your camera. Like, come on, man. Like, he was just being selfish, but he wouldn't give it to me. So it made me think. Like, I remember having what I call a by myself meeting. You know, that's when you just contemplating to yourself on your bed, just thinking, you know. And I was like, yo, where can I get a camera from? And I was thinking back to my childhood, you know, Thanksgivings and Christmases. I used to see my dad with a silver camera. And I hadn't seen it in like over a decade, but I just thought about that. And I said, you know, where's that camera at? And he gave it to me. He was like, here, you can have it. And that was a Canon AE1 35mm camera. And when he gave it to me, I noticed like the weight of it and the fact that it took film and you had to load film into it. And then with all of the buttons and the f-stop and the shutter speed, I began to look at this like a science. This was like a art form. And I said, all right, from that day on, I declared myself a photographer, just when he gave me that camera. And I remember I took pictures of GZA, We hung out. I took a bunch of pictures. And at the end of the night, I just pulled the film out of the camera with my hand. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't understand you had to roll it up and all of this. And, you know, and I remember taking that film to the lab and dropping it off. And I was so happy, just on some happy-go-lucky, like, yo, here's my film. And when I came back a week later, the woman at the lab was like, yo, you don't know what you're doing. You're not I'm like, what happened? She's like, everything came back black. Like, you know, there's nothing on this film. And, yeah, that was the beginning for me. You know what I mean? But I remember telling my brother, I'm like, yo, you know, thank you, man. I thought you were being selfish. You probably were being selfish, but thank you, because if you had given me that digital Canon Rebel, I don't think it would have had the same effect, in which I then, you know, kind of felt that I was going to take this up as an actual practice of mine. So at that point, you know, filmmaking and photography kind of merged. And when I made my first, like, proper documentary film, Field Niggas, I believe some of you have seen it today, you could tell that's a photographer-style documentary. You know what I mean? That's a documentary where it's out of sync, the audio and video are separated, and a lot of the shots are portraits, and the audio was recorded separately, and then I brought it together in the editing. We could talk about that much more in depth. I'm sure you will have some questions if you've seen that already. But I just wanted to give this brief overview of kind of where I'm coming from and how I got into this. If you had told me back then, or even in my early 20s, that I would have a career in this the way I have now, I may have not believed it, because I really felt like I needed formal training, or I needed to know the right people or something like that. And that's not what happened. What happened was just like a genuine interest in the love for the craft of expressing myself through the camera, whether it be a motion picture camera or the still photo camera. And I believe that's what gave me the ability to develop a career. And it wasn't necessarily easy, but I believe the love for the art form and the feeling like it was breathing, a form of breathing in terms of expressing deeper things that I couldn't necessarily speak with words, and different aspects of the world that I was seeing that I felt was important to depict. That's what gave me the position to go all over the world and even meet Shevaun in Kosovo. And I've been to so many countries with my work, and it really is something that was unexpected to me. You know what I mean? And in the beginning, I worked at a place called AMC Networks. Really, from the age of 23 to 29, I had a full-time job working in Bethpage, Long Island, as a control operator for various TV channels. And that job was good because I was able to make money without having to use my camera to make money. You know what I mean? So I wasn't shooting weddings and bar mitzvahs and using my camera just to try to make, you know, money to pay for rent or clothes or food or whatever. And that helped me to keep my art separate from initially associating it with making money. You know what I mean? And that job was a blessing, but even at that job, I would tell my coworkers, like, you know, I'm a filmmaker, and they'd be like, nah, you work here with me. If you were a filmmaker, you'd be making films. But even that encouraged me, because on my time off, I would go out into the streets and take photographs and make films. And, you know, Field Niggas is a film I made while at that job. And I was there for 6 years working the overnight shift, and my job was very boring. This wasn't the glamorous side of television. This was the technical side, where I was controlling the air feed, and there were satellites outside of the building. So anywhere like shows like Breaking Bad or The Walking Dead were playing, there were satellites coming from Long Island that were showing it, whether you were in Japan watching those shows or you were in Jamaica watching those shows. Also in that building was the Sundance Channel, the IFC channel, Women's Entertainment, MSG, Fox Sports. And my supervisors, because they knew I was a filmmaker and they supported it, they would mainly put me in the Sundance channel. So all night I was watching independent films. You know what I mean? And the main purpose of this job was to make sure that the little bug stayed in the bottom right corner and that the commercials played properly. And there was like a live TV guide on a computer where you could see like something called a bumper, which would say now, next, later. Now you're watching this. Next, this is playing. Later, this is coming up. And the commercials were the most important thing, because if the commercials didn't play properly, then the channel doesn't get paid. You know what I mean? So that job really helped me. And eventually I was able to quit that job. And I'll probably circle back and talk a little bit about how I left that job a little bit later.
So this collection of photographs was made from 2012 to 2016 or somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, there's a nice kind of irony, I guess, that this body work took you all around the world, but you filmed it basically in one place, one block in Harlem. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how you decided to really focus on one area. I know for many people in this room, one of the things we talk about in my class is kind of setting guidelines, instructions, making manifestos, and working within certain boundaries so you don't have limitless options. And so it seems like you set a really clear set of guidelines for yourself about how you wanted to make this film and who was going to be in it in terms of the geography. So maybe we can discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Harlem, I feel like an adopted son of Harlem because, you know, after I got left back in school, right, when I was 13, I began to become a seeker, or somebody who was looking for knowledge and wisdom and just trying to, you know, educate myself, self-educate. I didn't really trust the school system, as I mentioned. You know what I mean? I felt like, you know, true knowledge is not just limited to what you are taught in school, especially, you know, those early, like, you know, middle school, high school, all of that. Maybe in college you start to get more stuff, but I was interested in other things. And I was finding these books by people like Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. John Hendrik Clark, a woman named Joel Pookrum. A lot of these people were speaking about things that nobody really wants to talk about. You know what I'm saying? Deep metaphysics, science, and history, especially Black history prior to American history, right? And this was very interesting to me. So Harlem was a place where I was constantly at because I was looking for knowledge, and it was there. And it wasn't just through the books. It was through the brothers on the corner. You know what I mean? There were brothers on the corner who were delinquents, but they could tell you that light travels at the rate of 186,000 miles per second. You know what I mean? They tell you the circumference of the planet Earth is 24,896 miles. And I'm like looking at these guys like, yo, these brothers dropped out of school, but they got such a thirst and a respect for knowledge and education. I want to be like them. And they were older than me anyway. So they were more or less like, okay, I'm going to take you under my wing and open you up to some knowledge and wisdom and teach you certain things. Right. And, you know, a lot of those older brothers are deceased now. You know what I'm saying? The brothers that I was around, you know, but it was like I grew up militant. I grew up studying Malcolm X. You know what I mean? I grew up questioning a lot of things. Historically, I grew up very opinionated, you know what I mean? And, you know, this knowledge kind of gave me an edge, right? But during those times, I was looking for knowledge. I wasn't looking to take photographs and make films. So I was constantly passing Lexington Avenue on 125th Street and seeing the heavy police presence and seeing the drug addicts, right? And being like, damn, Harlem is like the Mecca of Black consciousness and awareness in America, but there's still so much in the underworld, in the underbelly of the city, even in such a rich city, in one of the richest countries in the world. Why does this exist? And it was always a question in my mind from my childhood, seeing these things in Jamaica Avenue, and I was always interested in other people's lives, and especially people who live on the fringes of society. So much later, you know, after kind of, I don't want to say mastering, because you never really master the lessons that the 5%ers teach. It's a lifelong journey. But after memorizing them at least, and evolving into now becoming someone who is an artist and expressing himself through the camera, then I settled on this one intersection in Harlem, 125th and Lexington in East Harlem. And I was like, okay, this is going to be the foundation of my work as a photographer, right? And it's because I felt like I could connect to this part of the city like nowhere else. In the early stages of being a photographer, I was reading about Robert Frank and Cartier-Bresson and a lot of these European photographers who shoot black and white, and I was trying to emulate their style. And I remember being around the Lower East Side, areas close to here, trying to document. And this one girl who had a whole bunch of piercings and tats, I asked her if I could take a picture, and she said, "Hell no." I was like, damn. She really shit on me one night, like really cold. It was so cold. And I was like, damn. I'm like, why am I shooting over here anyway? Like, let me go uptown where I get love, where people know me, where, you know, I can relate to people differently, right? So this was what was going in my mind around the age, you know, 25, right? So I began shooting in Harlem from there. And initially in the beginning, it was black and white in the daytime. And I said to myself, because I would ask myself these questions, like, how come I like Nobuyoshi Araki, the Japanese photographer, or how come I like Cartier-Bresson, or how come I like this photographer? And then I realized it's because they all have their own style. They're not looking like each other. All of the people that I liked, they all had their own distinguishable qualities as an artist. And I said, okay, I need to develop my own voice as a photographer. I can't be mirroring somebody else's style. That was cool in the beginning, just to kind of learn how the camera works and to learn about exposure and shutter speed and these type of things. But then I was just thinking to myself, you know, what's going to be my signature style, right? So as I began shooting in the day and continued shooting to the day, eventually it began to get later and later. And then now I'm shooting at night. And I never took color film seriously, but then I bought some color film because it was on sale at B&H. And my money was tight. So I'm like, okay, you know, let me just try this color film out because I want to keep shooting. And then I began to like experiment with it and say, damn, color film at nighttime looks kind of dope. I like this. I like this. So then I began doing it more frequently. And then I began scanning my film in an Epson V700 scanner that I bought from B&H. So this is really trial and error. My whole style came from trial and error. And my style wasn't just, what can I say, like trying to be innovative. Some of it was because certain film was on sale, so I bought that film. You know what I mean? It wasn't all just innovation. A lot of it was just kind of like, let me try something because I could afford to do it. You know what I mean? I bought the scanner because it was very expensive to have my film scanned at the lab. I said, let me do it myself. So yeah, it evolved from there. You know, I'm kind of going on a tangent, so reel me back in.
I just want to note that Richard Brody of the New Yorker calls you one of the most innovative, most important cinematographers of our time. So I feel like this story for you all to hear the history and origin of how he developed his craft is really important, particularly in the context of how, you know, you're framed now with such praise, and you know, it's just fascinating to hear how you went through this process of discovery basically on your own through trial and error, and as you said, a love for the possibility of expressing yourself. Maybe we can talk a little bit. We have a lot of cinematographers in the room and directors who are actively engaged in dialogues with their cinematographers. How you went about technically developing your style, things like lighting, shutter speed, and your framing, your composition, very consistent throughout this body of work. How you went about discovering those sort of technical aspects.
Well, thank you, number one, for what Richard Brody said and remembering that and all of that. A lot of the times I don't even really pay attention to the praise if I get it, because I'm like, I don't want to get, you know what I mean, too much into my own head. I feel like a baby still. I'm one of you all as well. I'm not calling you babies, but I mean, I'm on your level. Don't think I'm on a higher level. We're all equal here. And I have a lot to learn. I still feel like a baby filmmaker. You know what I mean? And I know that it's a love of mine and a passion of mine that I'm going to continue with throughout my life. So there's a lot of growth and development to occur in my work. But, you know, with the people that I photograph, I wanted to render beautiful images of them that go beyond the flesh, blood, and bone. Like, it wasn't just about the society, the destruction of the people that I photographed. It was more about the resilience and the strength within them. You know what I mean? And a lot of the people that I've chosen and who have chosen me or allowed me to photograph them, as I've mentioned, they live on the fringes of society, or they're dealing with things like drug addiction or poverty, things like this, police brutality, you know what I mean? Things of that nature. But I never really wanted to make that the central focus of my work. What I was really trying to do is show the inner light of my subjects. I should just say this, I don't want to come off the wrong way, but in the beginning, like, filmmaking and photography were boring to me. I always thought it was just some old men at a table talking about some theoretical stuff like that. And it was like not so interesting. But then when I began to have a reason to do it, which my reasoning, and we all have to think about our intention. Your intention is what's going to enable you to push through all of the pain, because it is very difficult once you start getting into certain projects, and it could, you know, it's very hard to complete a film, you know what I mean? And then to raise money to make a film, you go through a lot of different shifts and obstacles in order to make a project. So you really have to be solid within yourself in terms of your intention and your love for what you're making. But for me, what gave it a purpose and what made it not boring was trying to highlight the inner light of the people I photograph, and therefore having more of a spiritual perspective around my work. You know what I mean? You know, we live in a time where a lot of us, you know, we live in a world where people debate the existence of God. You know what I mean? And, you know, they tell you as a child, you don't know what love is. But at the same time, everybody knows what fear and hate is in this type of world. So it's an insane world that we live in. But for me, having a foundation rooted in spirituality, especially coming from a foundation of knowledge and wisdom, kind of photography became a dissemination point. It kind of became a prism for me to depict that light through. So I use filmmaking and photography for that purpose. You know what I mean? It's like I'm a minister, really, and I'm just using photography to get my message across. You know what I mean? And I think partially it's like that because I wasn't taught in a formal setting. You know what I mean? I just did it just on the strength, just because I was looking at it with an interest, similar to how I used to look at skateboarding or breakdancing. So yeah, the lighting, a lot of it is dark, you know what I mean? Because I'm shooting with, excuse me, I'm shooting with the street lights. I'm not using a flash. I never use a flash in any of my work. I feel like the flash could be a little abrasive, or it could bring too much attention, unwanted attention. You know what I mean? In the street, I move like a ninja. So I move very quietly in the streets, and I don't want to draw so much attention to me. I like to be able to maneuver and, you know, take pictures without drawing so much attention. So not using a flash, and also using a pretty quiet camera. Like usually the Nikon F2 was the main camera that went into the photos in that book. And this developed over time. As I mentioned, my father first gave me the Canon AE1, which is a legendary film camera. Shout out to the photographer Jamel Shabazz, who's also a big brother and a mentor to me. But he used to shoot with the Canon AE1. And we had a lot of discussions about how great that camera is. But later, I started shooting with the Nikon F2. And the Nikon F1 was probably the most used camera in Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, the photographers, they were using that Nikon F1 a lot. And in my research, I was like, all right, let me try the F2. You know, I think that'll be cool. Plus, Film Lab in Long Island, close to where I used to live at, they had it. So I just bought it real quick, and I fell in love with that camera. I still use those cameras to this day.
Which lens was that?
Yeah, good question, because in terms of not using a flash, to compensate for not having a flash, I use a very fast lens. So the Nikkor 55mm 1.2, you know, with an f-stop of 1.2, those of you who understand how the diaphragm on a camera works, 1.2 is a very fast lens which allows a lot of light to come in when you press the shutter. And that kind of offsets the fact that I don't use a flash at nighttime. The other thing which is interesting, and I want to tell you all this to encourage you on your own path, is that the film stock that I'm using is daylight rated film, Portrait 160. Most of these images, and I should probably scroll through some of them, is Portrait 160 film. And Portrait 160 is meant for like a sunny day. You know what I mean? But I'm using it at nighttime, and it's creating a struggle within the camera to create an exposure. And I like this idea of the technical struggle of the film to create an exposure mirrored against the struggle of the streets that I document.
When you're like taking these photos, and you were talking about trying to find the inner light of your subjects, how do you know after you've taken a photo or after you've gone and developed it? Like, how do you access the inner light? Like, do you see it when you press click, or is it after looking at the photos?
Well, like that saying, you know, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. You know what I mean? I mean, ultimately, all of us are light. Essentially, that's what we really are, but it's a choice to see it. We got to look for it within each other. If we look for darkness in each other, we'll find that. You know what I mean? If we look for sin, guilt, and fear in the world, there'll be plenty of witnesses to sin, guilt, and fear in the world. But if you look for innocence and kindness and gentleness, right, and mercy, you'll find that as well. So perception is a choice. You know what I mean? And you will receive whatever you request. So if you request to find the light in another person, you'll find it. You know what I mean? As long as you search sincerely for it. And my work came from and comes from a sincere place. But I'll tell you, like, I spend a lot of time afterwards. There's pictures that I shot that I thought were going to be great, and they weren't great. So I never printed them or nothing. You know what I mean? There were times where I swore I took a masterpiece, and later I'm like, damn, nah, man, that picture's not going anywhere. But then there's times when, you know, I'll develop the film, and I'll just know. Like, I'll be at the kitchen developing film, which is what I was doing for a long time. Now I send film out, because if I'm shooting 20 rolls of film, it's a long process to mix the chemicals and to do it all myself. But there were times where it became like a meditation to me, and I would have a bunch of film, I would develop it, it would take me hours, and then I would start scanning it. And after I scan it, I would do like a cheap scan, which could just show me the general picture, and then I would rescan it like maybe 10 times. One thing I should mention is, like, for these images, I'm not using Photoshop or After Effects or Lightroom, any of those things to adjust exposure or anything like that. What I'm doing is scanning it at a very high bit rate, right, to pull out all of the light, because if you look at the negatives, they're very thin. And thin is the term that means there's just not a lot of light in the negative. So you can't really see it if you were to hold it up to the light. So I would have to scan it over and over and over again. And then I would be impressed when I finally did see an image that was a good shot, but that I didn't know it was there. And then I'd be like, okay, let me scan it to get the proper color settings like that. Because I'll just mention that because a lot of people have asked me, like, about Photoshop and Lightroom, and I'm really not, I don't know that much about it, to be honest.
Does that include when you made your book that the book editor didn't enhance colors?
No.
Or that's exactly what you gave them?
Yeah, that's what I gave them. Yup.
No, I was just going to say, like, so going from your photography, which then we start, this is a still from IWOW, right? Like, sort of from your latest.
This is a photograph, but I used it as to promote the film.
Oh, to promote IWOW. But, so, like, that being said, though, there's that bridge between your photography and how it starts to inform your film language. How did that happen?
No, that's another great question, man. Like I said, I believed that they were both, and I still feel this, filmmaking and photography are very intertwined, especially in my practice. They're one and the same, and especially because I shoot my own films, it's all connected, right? And one discipline transfers over to the other. So if you're a cinematographer and you're used to shooting your own projects, I guarantee you'll be a good still photographer as well. There's just minor adjustments you need to make technically, but once you have the eye, then you could develop it more, and it transfers from one side to the other. The thing is, like, prior to becoming a photographer, when I was working with Wu-Tang and when I was doing music videos, and when I worked with the man, his name was Freedom, but he's also known as Popa Wu, I did a whole film of him that film was kind of a talking head style documentary that is like BBS style, not BBC, or what do you call it? Like BS? PBS. Thank you, yo, thank you. You know, like the Ken Burns, shout out to Ken Burns, and you know what I mean? It was kind of like that. Like, that's what I was trying to do. Like, I felt like the camera needed to be in the person's face speaking. Later, I broke all the rules. See, the thing is, you got to know the rules, and then you could break the rules. Know certain rules, and then you could go completely different. The other thing, and I'll come back to answer that, but I just want to say this. When you think about dancing, right? When you think about acting like theater, or if you think about music, painting, these art forms are thousands of years old, right? But filmmaking and photography are brand new. The camera itself is not even 300 years old yet. So we're not even at 1,000 years into what filmmaking and photography is. But when we think about film, old films, we think about Alfred Hitchcock, you know, we think about Kurosawa. That wasn't even that long ago. Those are the 1950s, right? So, you know, there's going to be people 1,000 years from now who look at us like we were the beginning of this. We were still. So the point is, there's a lot of room for innovation, right? You don't have to follow any rules. You could break the rules. You can make a film that people don't like. See, another thing, we're living in a time now where everyone's playing it safe. You know, we live in this social media generation where it's like, we all want to be liked and accepted and all of that, so we're all being careful not to get canceled and so on and so forth. Nah, go wild. Go wild. Don't hurt anybody. Try not to hurt nobody. Don't go to jail. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes down to your expression, don't feel like you got to play by the rules and be all safe and all of that. You know what I mean? Complete abstraction is the natural condition of the mind. The mind naturally is supposed to be abstract. When it becomes specific, then you get sick, because all sickness is very specific. If you want to be healthy, stay free, stay abstract. You know what I mean?
I also think there's a great lesson here for all you students about that moment when you've worked on something for so long. So you talked about working on a film for all those years, and you're just exhausted. You're burnt out. You have nothing left to give to filmmaking, let's say, and you've just put in 100%, and you feel empty, you know. But then the fact that you have this other form of self-expression can fuel you. It can renew you. It can reinvigorate you. And adjacent to that is that these industries or professional worlds can be incredibly crushing, whether it's, you know, Magnum or, you know, Cinereach. I don't know, whatever it is, you know, these establishments or organizations, they also can become so exhausting and challenging. And the fact that you can bounce back and forth, you never get held down by anyone. You know, as soon as you are not satisfied in your search for meaning for one, you can go to the other. So I really encourage you all to think about having this kind of companion art adjacent to your filmmaking, so that you continue your journey as artists without getting burnt out. Yeah, I think it's key to career longevity.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and take your time and take breaks. You know, I'm a photographer, but I don't always bring a camera everywhere I go. And, you know, when I was making Black Mother in Jamaica, that film took me 3 years. And part of the reason is because I stepped away from it sometimes for 3 months. I would step away from the editing. Sometimes I would turn on Premiere, which I was using to edit that film, and I would edit for like 10 minutes, turn it off, come back 2 weeks later, make one cut, one change, turn it off again. And then there'd be nights where I worked on it for 8 hours straight, stayed up all night, you know what I'm saying? And then there were weeks where every week I was working hard on it. Then I'd say, all right, I need some perspective. I'm going to step back and get away from this film for a while and go watch some films and go to some art galleries or speak to some other filmmakers and kind of re-energize myself and then get into it. So what you said is key. You gotta feel it in your chest, right? Like, not everything that you do got to come from a cerebral standpoint. Some things you just feel in your heart, and you let your heart lead you, and you have a determination to fulfill what's in your heart and to bring that out to the world. Because, like, think about it. all of the valuable things in this life, you got to kind of dig for, like oil, you know what I'm saying, gold. You got to excavate the earth and go deep for them things. It's the same thing with your treasure that's within you. We all have it, but a lot of us don't want to dig and go deep within ourselves for it. The key is to not seek outside of yourself, right? Like we're now, like also don't compare yourself to so many people, or you see your friends becoming successful and all this other successful stuff on social media or whatever. That's cool, but remember to turn inward and just focus on what you got to do, and don't get distracted. That's very hard to do nowadays, not to get distracted, right? And then there's things that you think you need and you don't really need them, right? You don't need certain associations, right, with certain organizations. For example, you alluded to Magnum Photos. I was in this agency, which is reputed as the most prestigious photo agency in the world. But it was one of the wackest experiences in my professional career ever. It was one of the most uncomfortable situations of my life ever, and I left them. You know what I mean? It was basically when George Floyd got murdered in 2020. They were looking for black artists because they were under attack on Twitter, on Reddit, for being 75 years old as an agency and only having like one black person. So, you know, they hired a black woman named Hannah Price, myself, and another photographer named Colby Dill. And after like 2 years, they fired Hannah. And I kind of spoke up. I spoke up a little aggressively about things. And it was more or less like, oh, Khalik, you should be lucky to be here. You should be happy to still be here. We kept you. I was on some, they don't know I come from 125th and Lex, studying Malcolm X, studying Nat Turner. They don't know where I really come from that. I'm cut from that cloth. You know what I'm saying? So my reaction was like, oh, he's a problem. You know what I mean? And that was also a crazy time with the pandemic, as you all remember. We're all kind of over it now, but just remember how 2020 was. Remember that. That was insane, and I didn't want to get vaccinated. I remember having a big show in Paris. I didn't even go to it. So people took that as disrespect, like, oh, he got a big show with Bruce Davidson. He didn't even show up. Anyway, I don't want to speak negatively about anybody or any organization, but I'm talking about my experiences, and you got to remain on point. You got to, no matter what happens, you got to get back to your center and then be like, all right, you know, I have a voice and a purpose, and it's important that I express it. So that's where I am now. That's where I'm still creating work.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. I will say, even being part of an institution like this, I know we both feel of really wanting to speak out when we see things that that don't sit well with us, but then also we want to fit in and we want to keep our jobs, and you know, we don't want to be disrespectful. It's not our intention, but we want to be able to express ourselves.
Yeah, and I think what makes that complicated too is collaboration. So many of you, part of what you have to do, you know, some of the students in my advanced class, you know, you may have a personal vision, you may have something that you want to do, but you have to collaborate with a whole bunch of people to make something. And I wonder, you know, who have done very personal work, but you've also collaborated with some of the biggest artists in the world and very high stakes projects. How do you navigate collaboration while also maintaining your own vitality, as Shevaun was just talking about?
I've been blessed that the people that I've collaborated with had a lot of respect for me, and there was a mutual respect. I want to shout out the amazing filmmaker and director Khalil Joseph, LA-based filmmaker. And in 2016, Khalil calls me and is like, yo, I'm doing this project, and I want you to be a cinematographer on it. And one out of many, because I think he had like 7 cinematographers. I'm just like, all right, we speak for like 45 minutes, and he's telling me about all of this. And at the end, I'm like, I had already agreed, but I'm at the end of the call, and I'm like, yo, so who is this for? He's like, oh, it's for Beyonce. I'm like, what? We doing a project for Beyonce, and it ended up being Lemonade. You know, so in terms of that film, I shot on my own because they know my style. They know that I could kind of, you know, do things independently. So I went to New Orleans and I shot in the 9th Ward area, and I had a Super 8 camera, and I was just stopping people in the street, basically I was hanging out inside of a gas station because it wasn't like 125th and Lex, but I tried to create a similar situation where I stayed in one place, right, and waited for people to pass by. And it happened to be this gas station that I found. And, you know, at the end, I just gave Khalil and his team all of the film, and that was it. You know, I went home, and then I didn't see that film until it was on HBO. And when I seen it, I'm like, damn, they used everything, almost everything I shot, because that was one of the first, what's the word that you were just using again? Collaborations. That was like one of the first collaborations that I was doing, and I felt like, damn, I gotta really shine in this project. I gotta really try really hard. And that's good when you sit down with yourself and you really just kind of think to yourself, yo, I have to excel. I have to excel. That type of power that you generate when you kind of like program your subconscious to make sure that you get out there and it's like no mistakes allowed. That's how I felt about that project. Number one, they were paying me a lot. I never got paid that much for a project. So I was just like, yeah, I got to excel. And plus, Khalil, I really look up to him as a brother, as a big brother, and someone who was kind of helping my budding career. So that's why that came off that way. And later on, I worked with Solange, and I asked her, like, yo, did Beyonce tell you about me or something? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, I worked with, she's like, no. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I didn't know you worked with my sister. So that was crazy. And I'm like, she discovered me through Black Mother. Because when Black Mother came out, she was at Metrograph. And they played it here at Metrograph, and she was in the audience. I wasn't there at that time. But collaborating with her was really peace too. Like, she was just mad simple and down to earth. It wasn't all of this nonsense. It was just peace, you know?
Do you feel like the spirit and kind of soul connections that you have with your subjects influence the way that you capture them on film and on video?
Definitely. Yeah, like I said, that's what I'm looking for. You know, it's not just about, like, when you take a picture of a person, of course you're taking a picture of their body, right? But there's an energy transference that I'm interested in. I like my mom is she's not a doctor, but she's a registered nurse. But I grew up studying a lot about, you know, medical doctors, and I was always interested in X-rays. So in a way, I feel like I'm taking an X-ray of a person. That's at least what I'm trying to do, especially with the work on 125th Street. It's like a psychic X-ray. That's the idea, to go beyond just the physicality of how they may look, right? And I'm trying to bring about a feeling in the heart of the viewer that looks at the picture too. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And also it depends on the viewer. Like, you know, I make work for people that resonate with it and that are attracted to it. And I don't expect that to be everyone. You know what I mean? Like, as I was mentioning about this generation, this time we live in, it's like everybody wants to make everything for everybody. But in reality, back in the day when I was coming up, like, you had different cliques. You had the punk rockers, you had the break dancers, you had the hip hop heads, you had the, you know what I mean, the grunge guys, you had the people, right? Now it's like everything is overlapping everywhere. But I had my own nuanced, you know, interest. So it's the same thing, like, with the artists that I look up to. Like, a lot of people that I like Nobuyoshi Araki, the Japanese photographer, some people hate him. You know what I mean? I love him. I love his work, you know? So I feel like the work I'm making is going to resonate with certain people.
For sure.
You know, but it has to do with a feeling. It's an emotion. It's definitely not necessarily just a political statement. The politics are involved. Of course, we could talk about, you know, many different political ideas, poverty and redlining and gentrification and so many different things when it comes down to my work. But there's so much more to the story that I'm really trying to touch on that's beyond just the world, you know? As somebody who's so much into his own personal work, it's great to have the support of big companies so that I could kind of like take care of myself financially too. And that's the difficult thing. Like, you know, that's also why I had the job at AMC Networks doing the TV work and keeping the camera separate for all those years. And now the camera and my financial life are converged, but I still do personal work, and I've learned how to balance that psychologically, how to know, okay, this is personal, this is for money, but at the same time, even though this is for money, I need to bring my whole self to it. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I had a meeting with a student just last week who was saying, you know, I really want to do well, I want to be successful, I want to make a career in this, and kind of engineering things a different way of looking what is in the heartbeat of culture now and trying to make things in that style and hope to find a path of success in that way. And I think one thing about you is that you've just done your own thing and brought the industry to you. And I think, you know, again, in school we're kind of taught to do it the other way, but there is this possibility, and we see sort of the incredible, this piece, for example, I mean, Nike's never going to get that from somebody who's trying to, look like somebody else. That clearly comes from the heart as your own style of image making, and we can connect it to your photography book and to your other filmmaker also. So yeah.
No, thank you, Shevaun. That means a lot. And I totally agree with that. And the thing is to develop your own style, your own voice. Of course, you're going to be inspired by other people. I got many inspirations. You know what I'm saying? There's contemporaries, and there's people that are much older, and people that are deceased who I love their work. The thing is, it's like one thing I wrote, because I write on my studio walls sometimes, you know, and I just wrote, it doesn't matter what camera I use. Because early on, I thought it was about having the most professional looking camera, the sharpest lenses, the sharpest. When I did the thing with Nike, they wanted me to shoot on VHS. They were like, yo, why don't you just shoot the whole thing with a VHS tape? I'm like, nah, let me shoot 16 millimeter. I love 16 mil. But some of this was camera phone. Some of the stuff like at the end was with the cars was on a phone. So it was a mix. Similar to the Solange piece, I use different formats and with Black Mother, and I may show a clip of that later. But that was 16 mil, Super 8, digital video, high 8 cassette tape footage that goes back to my childhood, the first camera my mom gave me. So you don't have to be technically excellent, but you just have to have a unique voice, I feel, and then you got to believe in it. Right, that's the thing. You got to really believe in yourself, because some of the ideas, if I were to kick them to like production companies, they may say that doesn't make any sense to us. We're not going to fund that. You know what I mean?
How did the casting and budget work for this piece? And if you don't have to share anything you don't want, but just generally speaking, did you have support for that, or
Definitely.
were you doing that all on your own?
No. It was a true collaboration. Like I had people on in Nike, my friend Jake, who took an interest in these guys that he actually met through Instagram, and they lived in the Bronx, in the Cromwell area, and also in like close to the Polo Grounds uptown, like 155th Street. And he casted them just like that. He just asked them, do you want to be in this advertisement? And then I drove over to where they were with him, and we met them, and we just set a date to shoot it, and that was it. The whole idea with this was that it was supposed to like somebody from their crew shot it. The idea was, okay, it's a group of young guys, and one of them has a camera, like City of God or something like that. You know what I mean? And one of them is just filming it. So that's also why we use the camera phone in certain parts of it.
I have a difficult question to ask, but it's good because it comes from what you were saying with the psychological battle of like when you make work for a bigger company, and then you still bring your truth to it, and then you go through that personal psychological battle. Like I think something that I see a lot that happens with really powerful work is that once a big company sees it, sometimes there's this commodification of truth, sometimes or commodification of authenticity. And like how do you kind of grapple with that, so to speak? Like when you decide, I mean, you have to, you don't want to say no, right? But it's like, do you feel like your intentions are exactly the same as theirs?
Yeah, that's a hard thing, man. I mean, you gotta really consider those things. I personally never ever felt or never had the experience of feeling like I sold out. You know what I mean? Or that I just did something just for the money, even if it was a lot of money, because even with the Nike ad, I really had to get to know those young guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And roll around with them, and go to Cromwell and be out at nighttime. It was my idea to shoot at night. It was more like the commercial projects that I've worked on. People came to me and were like, "We like what you did on your own. We kind of want to borrow that. We want you to do it, but through the lens of this brand, right? So can you bring this to us and let's collaborate like that?" And a lot of the people in these brands are actually down to earth, and they're just cool people. Not all of them are on some, they just want to just steal or use you. In my experience, it's been good so far. I haven't done so much commercial work. Maybe I think I've done like 4 or 5, or maybe more. You know what I mean? I worked with Louis Vuitton, and Louis Vuitton is one of those brands that you wouldn't expect me to work with. But this is when Virgil Abloh was still alive, and he was working a lot with Wu-Tang. So they knew that, and they knew that I worked with Wu-Tang, so they asked me to do a piece with GZA. And I said, all right, cool. GZA's my man. We used to play chess on the tour bus. When I was 22 years old, I was working at a nursing home. This is before the TV job. And I worked with a lot of elderly people. And I got into an argument with my manager, and I remember I ripped up my scrubs. And I ripped them up because I'm like, if my scrubs are good, there's a chance I'll put them on and come back to work tomorrow. But I ain't coming back. So I just ripped them all up, And I was speaking to GZA like, yo, I just quit my job. And he's like, yo, that's good. Come on the road with me. I'm like, what? He's like, yo, I'm going on tour for a month. This is in 2008. And that was an awesome experience to travel with him.
You found ways to bring your truth to people at the company, right? Like it wasn't like it was a bad experience, and like you said, Louis Vuitton.
Oh, right.
And then
yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing with the rapper Nas. Nas is one of my favorite rappers ever, and I was able to work with him on a music video because an awesome director named Savannah Seton. She contacted me through Instagram actually, and was just like, I'm doing this project and I want you to be a part of it. And I'm like, who is it for? And she tells me Nas. And the craziest thing is my 5% educator, my person that was like a mentor, right, and an older brother to me, he was Eminem's bodyguard. This is a guy that was like 300 pounds. His name was Khalik Allah. He was like 6'5", 300 pounds. He was Eminem's bodyguard. He was 50 Cent's bodyguard. And at the end of his life, he was Nas's bodyguard. He was actually coming home from Abu Dhabi, being on tour with Eminem, and he had a heart attack in the airplane and passed away. Prior to that, he was on tour with Nas, and I said, yo, bring me on the road with you. I want to meet Nas. And he was like, okay, I'll set that up. And then I told him, like, nah, I don't want to meet Nas on a tour or at a show. I want to meet Nas in an office. and then he died. A couple months later, I get this call to work with Nas. So I really feel like that was him in the other dimension kind of organizing things for me here. That's just what I think. You could think that's crazy or whatever, but I believe in that. You know what I mean?
I think one thing, so your commercial work and your music video work, your art really, and the way that you've gotten these jobs is quite different from your documentary filmmaking work. And one thing that stands out is your relationship with your subjects.
Yeah.
So in these cases, you're going into these environments. For example, Solange, I think you had spoken on the phone, but it's not like you knew each other that well. And similar for the ads that we saw. But in your film and photo work, these are people that in some cases for over 10 years. You met as a teenager when you were 14 when you started, or in the early days. And your most recent film, IWOW, which again we're not screening in this series, but anyone who's excited by this work, I really encourage you to seek out and see. It's 3 hours. It's a longer film, but it really gets into
No, go ahead.
the nature of some of these long-term relationships. And for anyone, this again is a topic that comes up a lot in documentary, but also with narrative work. In some cases, there's many directors who work with actors, only the same actors again and again. And this is a certain approach of really finding a source of meaning in your personal work from relationships and being fueled by a care for them, an intense care, which can really kind of cross over into your personal life. So in IWOW, for example, one of your collaborator subjects, Frenchie, comes to the house, your house, and you show that on camera. And so IWOW is really about this topic of how these worlds collide. I don't know if you want to say anything.
This is Frenchie. Yeah, no, this is a film that was kind of a reaction to the way I was seeing life, to my own development personally, and it's not necessarily a neat film. It's this type of film that I made that I felt it's okay if people don't like this film. Because as artists, of course, we want people to like our work, and we want people to attract to it, right? In the past, I've had my films play in new directors, new films. I've had MoMA acquire Black Mother for their permanent collection. I played at Lincoln Center. I've done a lot. You know what I'm saying? I met you in Kosovo. Criterion Channel picked up my work. And after some of those experiences, I kind of had the idea, like, how sustainable is this? If I really talk about the world the way I see it, maybe people won't like that. Or if I make a film that focuses on my worldview, right? Because I have certain ideas that are radical, you know what I mean? And I put that into that project, specifically into that project.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, so it was a risk. It was a risk. And it turned certain people off. I mean, it wasn't anything disrespectful to people or anything hurtful, I don't feel. But at the same time, it was super raw. But my work is raw anyway. The thing is, around the time when Black Mother came out, and I don't think that they've all seen that film, but I was in different filmmaking fellowships and groups, and there were certain advisors who were kind of trying to soften me up in a way, right? Or trying to dull me down, like, oh, you're too edgy. You're too edgy. Like my first film, Field Niggas, for example, I wasn't trying to be provocative with that title. That's just the title that I felt was most appropriate, right? I had a full-time job. I wasn't even in the filmmaking world. So when I came with that title, it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna make a splash in the filmmaking world with such a provocative title. It was just like, yo, this is real to me, right? This is really coming from a Malcolm X speech called Message to the Grassroots, where he talked about the field slaves and the house slaves, right? And I felt like the people I'm documenting, you know, because slavery never really ended in America anyway. It's transitioned into the prison industrial system. It's transitioned into poverty and, you know what I mean, the war on drugs and, you know, the crack epidemic and all of these different things. So the people I'm documenting are not really the house slaves who are more privileged and comfortable living well. The people I'm focusing on, a lot of them, are in the street, you know what I mean? So they're in the field. They're still picking cotton in a sense, you know what I mean? Even if it doesn't sound nice to say that, right? So that's really why I came with that title. But then when I was in these fellowships, I was like, nah, I gotta maintain my edge. They're telling me to be careful. One woman told me not to name my film Black Mother. I said, why? She was like, oh, that's too provocative, Black Mother. I said, yo, didn't you hear the title of my other film? What do you mean? You know what I'm saying? And then she was like, oh, only Black mothers are going to want to see your film. And I was like, nah. So sometimes you hear people's advice and you go the other way. It's important to hear people out, but that doesn't mean you have to follow what they're saying or obey it, but just listen. You know what I mean? Some of it could be helpful. Like, take the best, leave the rest. Take the best part for yourself. Even with what I'm saying here today, I don't expect everybody to fully agree with everything I say, but just take the best part for yourself. Take the parts that could help advance you in your work and take that as inspiration to build, you know?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really again admire about you, but we all sort of intentionally or unintentionally internalize kind of self-censorship or monitor ourselves, keep ourselves in check. And I think you just have a really heightened awareness about not letting yourself do that and remaining free. And I think when you do work with these institutions and organizations and people who are supposed to be the experts, you know, you then hear like the superego, you hear this force reiterating those things, and it's very hard not to comply. And you've found ways not to and continue making work. And I think with IWOW, you know, it was a very brave film. You were taking on issues that even, you know, innovative documentary festivals that embrace creativity and new forms of self-expression, you know, they weren't ready for that because you were saying things that everybody knows, but no one would say out loud.
Right.
About the complications between, you know, our subjects and the filmmaker, and just like the hardships and process of making a film, being vulnerable. You know, a lot of documentary work is other people's vulnerability, but you really captured your own vulnerability, and I don't know if people were ready to see that.
Yeah. No, what Shevaun is speaking about is the personal aspects to that film. That film is actually, in a sense, I turn the narrative towards my own personal life. And the reason why I did that is because many of the people that I document are very open and vulnerable to me as a documentarian coming in and focusing on their lives, and they've been so generous with opening their hearts to me and allowing me to peek into their life, and they've told me certain things, and you see this in my films. So after making 2 films like that, one in New York and then another one in Jamaica, the one in Jamaica, a woman actually gave birth to my film, and she allowed me to film her in the most intimate part of her life, which is delivering a child. I was in the hospital with her, and I filmed the baby being born. Right? So that's so intimate. So after those experiences, I felt like, okay, now I want to do something in which I'm exposed, right? Now I'm going to do something where I was shedding tears in that film. Like there's a scene with my ex-girlfriend who was Italian, but she lived in Brussels, and I fly to Brussels in that movie, and she's not really feeling me in that moment, and we have an argument. And I included that in the film. It doesn't make me look good. Put it that way. You may love my work and then see that film and be like, yo, I'm not feeling him anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I purposely included it because it was real, right? So the other thing is there's nothing to fear. You know, I mean, we live in this world, this earth plane, this dimension where we're constantly protecting ourselves. You know what I mean? From sickness, we're taking medication. From society, from our friends, we're trying to be careful. We're trying to show up and be a certain way and be careful. From our own family, we don't want to get into any arguments. And that's all good. But at the end of the day, you were created innocent. You are innocent. You are the light of the world. Essentially, what you are is a being of light, really. The physical body that you are currently using is just a communication device. It's just like a cell phone almost that you use to interface with other beings in this dimension. But ultimately, you're not that body. You are spirit. You're not flesh, blood, and bone. You're not something that's vulnerable. You're not something that dies and ages and decays. That's not your reality. That's just something that you're using temporarily. So if you come into that state of awareness, then you'll realize there is nothing to fear. And then you'll take what we call risk. Really, it's just the freedom to express yourself. And it's not like you need to censor yourself or be a slave to other people's ideas about who you are, right? You have to find the light, find the courage really within yourself to just express what's within you. You know what I mean? And I guarantee people will love it. Not everyone, though. Some people will hate you for it, right? But you got to check your intentions. See, intentions are so important, especially as an artist. You got to constantly ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why? What's the real intention behind it, right? If it's a superficial intention, that'll show up eventually in the work, right? In the beginning, I didn't know about film festivals. I didn't know about this world of support that is out there to support an artist. I was just making the work to satisfy my own self, right? And growing up in hip hop, being inspired by Wu-Tang, right? 90s hip hop, those MCs would say the most violent stuff. My favorite MCs were like the rap group Mobb Deep, Prodigy, right? And these dudes were super poetic, but also kind of aggressive and raw, but super real. And I'm inspired by that. So I got to keep it real with that. The 90s era hip hop that I was raised on as well, right? And not just the music, but the people, you know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, as someone who's really defined your style, and I don't think this is working. As someone who's really defined your style, you know, by, like you said, trial and error. And I feel like when we watch your work, it has a very, very singular, you know, identity in its language and its look, you know, and that came from you, all these different paths that you were finding that now has resulted in your style. Do you now almost feel like, in the same way where you with Black Mother, you were like, okay, let me turn it inward, almost asking, like, on a formal level, like on a textual level, what are you exploring now? Like, what do you feel like you're breaking into, if there are any new discoveries?
Now I'm trying to expand my comfort zone by stepping into zones that I'm not so comfortable in, such as fiction now. I've been doing documentaries my entire career, and with the exception of that film that I made when I was 19 called The Absorption of Light, because that was a film that I actually scripted and acted out, you know what I mean? But again, that was more like a student kind of project. But I do want to make narrative feature films, fiction films, and write stories. I was just in Switzerland at Locarno Film Festival, and I was playing Black Mother there, which is kind of crazy because that film is 6 years old. So to go to that festival and play an old movie, but it's because I was in a program called Open Doors, and the people in this program were able to meet industry professionals. And some of the people I met were professional screenwriters or people that could help me to develop a script. Even though I'm not really ready right now, I need more time to think about an idea and to get those intentions clear and to kind of meditate on it. But that's where I want to go. You know what I mean? You know, one of my favorite films is a movie called Kids about Larry Clark, right? And Larry Clark was like 52, and that was his first film. So I feel like, you know, at this age I'm at, I just turned 39, I feel like I got the world in front of me still, right? Like a lot of, you know, filmmaking is not like boxing. Boxers, they start peaking in their 20s or early 30s, really like their late 20s. You know what I'm saying? A lot of athletes. But when it comes to the arts, you could create art your whole life. You could be 70 years old, 80 years old, and peak as an artist. So I take that as inspiration, like to look at Larry Clark's career. You know, I don't like all his films, but Kids is one of my favorite films of all time. Also, the movie Belly by Hype Williams, who's a music video director. I seen this movie when I was 13 in the theaters, and you know, Malik Saeed, the cinematographer, he works with a company that I work with called Little Minx. So, you know, certain things have come full circle, but yeah, I want to do more commercial work, definitely, and I also want to do, I want to see what the next evolution is for me in photography at the same time. The thing is, when you have a lot of options, you could become paralyzed by those options. And me, as a filmmaker and as a photographer, I wear both of these hats. So it takes time. Like my photo book took 3 years of just taking photographs every week and then developing this into a book. A film like Black Mother took me 3 years to make. So that's what I have to give myself the grace to say, okay, I'm just focused on photography now for the next 2 or 3 years. All right, I'm just focused on filmmaking now for the next 2 or 3 years. I've been in kind of like a moment of self-reflection and kind of like re-energizing myself because I've been teaching a lot. I went to Europe last February, March, and April, 3 months. I was in about 6 different countries, going to many different schools and speaking and teaching, but more formally, like 5-day workshops here, or I was in Geneva at a school called the Head School, and I was teaching there for like a week. And then I went to Berlin, and I was at another school. I can't even pronounce its name, Oscarsvismos, something like that. And I was there for a while, you know what I'm saying? So I gave so much that now I'm like, damn, okay. You know what I mean? I have to go back into re-energizing, recharging. And what I do to recharge is I go on long walks. I go hiking by myself. I leave my phone in the car. You know what I mean? I disconnect and I go even at nighttime, and I just commune with nature and the raccoons and the stars. You know what I mean? And that's how I get re-energized. And I've been doing that a lot recently. But what I feel like is, if you ever seen that movie, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. You know what I'm saying? Watch that movie if you've never seen that. Watch Field of Dreams. You know what I'm saying?
James Earl Jones,
rest in peace. Rest in peace. Word. Yeah, it's a deep movie because, I mean, the point is, if you see, the trick is you have to make work before people could believe in it. You got to kind of be a proof of concept within yourself, right? All of the commercial work I did, working with Khalil Joseph, who brought me to work with Beyonce and all of that, that would have never happened unless I had made a film on my own and just put it on YouTube for free. I made this film in 2014, and I put it on YouTube for free, and it was online, and certain people, like even the rapper J. Cole, reached out to me and was like, yo, my girl told me about your film. I want to work with you. Later, J. Cole played Black Mother on the Jumbotron behind his performances. You know what I mean? And it's just something that would have never happened unless I put myself out there. A lot of times we're afraid to put ourselves out there because we think people are going to steal from us or take our style or whatever. I knew an awesome rapper who was in my neighborhood growing up, and I would say, yo, put your work out. Get your work out there. He was like, nah, man, if I put it out there without a proper distributor, people are just going to copy my work. I never believed in that. You know what I mean? Nothing real can be threatened. Put it that way. So if you got something real, just put it out there. It's not like when I put out my first film, it's not like people ripped it and went, you know what I mean, and did all these different crazy things with it. What ended up happening is True False Film Festival said, yo, can we talk to you? And I was at the loading dock at my old job. And I'm on the phone and they say, take your film off YouTube. And I'm thinking that they got a problem with it. And I'm like, why? You know, they're like, no, we want to bring you to the film festival and play it in front of an audience. And I never did that before, ever in my life. So then I said, okay, I'll privatize it. I didn't want to completely delete it. I said, I'll just make it private, you know. And then I went to True False, and that's where I met Leah Giblin from Cinereach, who ended up financing Black Mother. That's where I met people from Sundance, like people like John Cardellino, who ended up like bringing me into different programs. And this really came from making something and then just giving it to the world kind of carelessly, you know what I mean? Without feeling like I was playing myself or I was going to experience like loss or something. So I encourage you all to do that with your own work, you know what I mean? But don't feel like you need to just put it all on Instagram. Try to position yourself, know where you want to be. Like for me, I wanted my films to be in places like the Criterion Channel. I wanted my photographs to end up in a photo book. I didn't want to just be taking pictures and it just be on social media, right? For the first couple years of being a photographer, I didn't put anything out. I didn't even have Instagram until maybe 2020, right? And I was shooting since, you know, 2010, right? So I was keeping it to myself until I felt comfortable enough with it. And the idea was, where does this work land? Where do I want it to be? And the idea was, I wanted galleries. I wanted it to be in exhibitions. I wanted it to be in museums. I didn't want it to just live on social media and count the likes and feel like my value depended on how many people were commenting on it and all of this nonsense that we live in now. You know what I'm saying? That has a place, don't get me wrong, but you got to kind of know where you want to live as an artist and where you want your work to land. And if you get clear about that, you're on the way.
Hi, nice to meet you. I really, really love what you said about like looking for, like perception as a choice, and like looking for light and looking for kindness and mercy and gentleness, and that's a beautiful thing. And I wanted to ask, because you work on your projects for so long, you know, with these people and with the same people over and over again, how much of that relationship is developed on camera and how much of it is developed off camera? And do you go into that relationship with your camera? Because there's such a trust and love that comes through in these conversations, and your voice is such a big part of the film that, you know, you can really feel the connection between you and your subject. And so I wanted to like ask about how much the relationship is developed on or off camera, and then also, because you work on them for so long, do you go in with an idea of what you want the final product to look like, or is it you're letting it guide you as you go?
Yeah, definitely. It's organic, and I don't really know what I'm gonna get. I let it guide me. I keep an open mind. I don't necessarily lock in to saying this is exactly what I want, because I may be surprised later. The first part of your question, I would say most of it is off camera. A lot of the relationships and the trust is prior to ever lifting up the camera, right? And the other thing I want to say is, it hasn't been easy. There's also people that said no. Like I would find a very interesting face of somebody who I saw the light in them, or I was interested in documenting them or capturing it, and they would just say no. So you got to respect that, because what I learned is that my reputation is very important. If I have a reputation of someone who's violating people or taking pictures of people that don't want to be photographed, then that reputation will follow me, and then I'll be attacked or something like that, which has never happened, because I'm very conscious of the relationship. People who have told me, like, yo, I see you all the time with your camera, but never take my picture. I don't even want to end up in the background. That's happened before, and I just had to be like, all right, peace. I won't take your picture like that. I'll be careful not to, or just whatever, and then defenselessness is important too, because I've had times where, I was in the street with my camera and somebody would just walk up to me and say, yo, I'm gonna slap the shit out of you for no reason. And in that moment, I could have reacted, right? Or I could have walked away, but I just had to hold my own and just stand there and be non-defensive, right? Because if you give off the energy of fear, you could be attacked easily too. Or if you react to that or interpret it as an attack and then attack back, now that brings you into an energy that's negative. So you got to be above the battleground. That's the psychology about it. I mean, I've never went into the streets without praying first. And I don't mean in any religious way. I just mean directly with God, just directly with spirit, getting into the spirit of being open-minded and non-judgmental, right? And that people could feel that. People could feel that energy, right? And I don't judge the people I photograph as limited in any way, which is kind of a breath of fresh air for them too. So that helps to develop trust, where it's like, oh, this guy's not looking at me like I am my circumstance. Yeah, I'm in tattered clothes, I'm in the streets right now, but this person is seeing a deeper thing that's reminding me about what I really am and who I am. Because we're not our circumstances. I don't care if you've been on drugs. I don't care if a woman been selling her body or whatever the case may be. We're all much deeper than where we find ourselves. You know what I mean? These are just experiences that we go through in this life. But as I said, there's people who have taken to me and said, cool, yo, take my picture. When my film came out, afterwards, people were volunteering to be in my photographs, which was kind of awkward, because now it went from me selecting who I photographed and kind of choosing them to people just jumping in front of the camera like, yo, take a picture of me. And I can't say no, because then it looks like I'm not interested in them. So then there's that dynamic, So I've been through a lot, put it that way. It looks simple when it's finished. This is why I have so much respect for artists, because you never know what they went through to make their work. You know what I mean? It's so easy to be like, oh, I don't like that, or that's whack, or that's nothing. But trust me, if you understand what people go through to make work, it'd be more, and I feel like you do, I'm just saying generally, you know what I mean? But the other part of your question, no, I don't necessarily know what it's going to be in the end, but I have an idea, and I know that I have a power, right? There is a power of being the one with the camera. There is a power of being the one taking the picture, right? And you have to respect that this person trusts you. So I try to uphold the dignity of the people I photograph, you know? This is a picture, I never really photographed children so often, you know what I mean? But this is a picture where the mother was walking with her daughter and said, yo, watch my daughter, I'm gonna go to the store, I gotta go to the store. I didn't even know the woman, but she had seen me on the street and seen how other people were allowing me to photograph them, and she just trusted me, and I was like, yo, okay. And I'm like, is it okay if I take a picture? And she said, yeah. So I just got down to her level, you know, and took a picture, and this was the shot. So and then later when I saw them, I had it, because I would carry, another way to develop trust is I would carry a book of prints that I printed inexpensively at CVS. And, you know, CVS prints, so it's not high quality, but I would have like a little photo album, and I would show people. And they would, oh, you photographed my cousin, that's my brother, that's my dad you took a picture of. And then they'd be like, all right, cool, you know? So you develop trust over time, but there had been years of photographing. Even so, by the time I made Field Niggas, that was after I had done all of this footwork as a photographer. And that's also why in that film, people are holding their stance waiting for me to press the shutter, because they couldn't really differentiate between the motion camera and the still camera. You know what I mean? So that's definitely a photographer style documentary.
It's a bit more of a meditative question, and a lot about what you speak about spirituality. I think not just me, but probably everyone else in the room. It's pretty incredible. And you speak a lot about being true to yourself. And one of my favorite music groups is now finding recognition after doing this thing for so long. And they kind of speak about keeping a slow, deliberate pace that's consistent, which I'm trying to figure out, and I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, especially in such a hyper-competitive era we're living in as young artists, with Instagram and so much competition, and it's finding a balance between keeping that slow, deliberate pace, because at the end of the day, we want to be true to ourselves, but also then making a living off of what we want to do. And I don't know if you have any words of advice about things that you maybe dealt with when you were younger, and more intrinsic things or techniques that helped you kind of to fight off those inhibitions to kind of take those short little gratifications, or the jobs that pay the bills but don't feel true to you. Yeah.
Nah, it's a really important topic. Yeah, you got to have knowledge of self, right? Like, you got to know your value, know your worth, and understand that there's something in you that's very unique that only you could do, right? And this is because you were raised a certain way. This is because you had certain experiences when you were going to the grocery store with your mom as a child, certain things you saw, right? Those little details you got to remember about yourself. You know what I mean? Those things that happen within your family that only you know, the unique perspectives, those types of feelings you felt as a child, right? All of that is valuable. You got to lean into that type of thing, right? And try to find a way to get in touch with who you really are, right? And really respect who you are. And don't do things that you don't want to do, because number one, you'll regret it later if you do something you didn't want to do. So you don't got to take every job that comes to you. The other thing is, you got to sharpen your skills continuously, as I'm still doing to this day. I'm trying to sharpen my technical skills. I'm trying to sharpen my sensitivity, right? You got to be sensitive as an artist. I don't mean sensitive that, you know, you start crying sensitive. I mean sensitive to energy, sensitive to other people's emotions, sensitive to how people are going to interpret yourself. Not so sensitive that you then begin to censor yourself, but sensitive that at least you know what you're making other people feel. Right? Because at the end of the day, art is intended to make people feel something. right? If you could do that, then your work will be powerful. Your work will have a certain power to it, right? And focus on your personal work, and then other things will come. You know, sometimes it's good just to get a job like I did, so that you don't use the camera or whatever your art form is for money. You know, for me, having that job at AMC Networks came after I had been on tour with GZA. I was on tour with GZA in 2008, but I started that full-time job in 2009. And after the tour, I was thinking, I'm just going to be doing music videos, traveling, living out of a tour bus. And my friend told me, like, yo, I'm working at this place called AMC Networks. You should come get a job there. I was like, nah, I'm living lovely. You know what I mean? I'm chilling. I'm all over. You know what I mean? I'm doing well. A couple months later, I had a negative balance in my Chase account. I said, nah, yo, what was that job? And then I got into that job, and I was like, okay, you know, I'm gonna put the camera over there for a minute, focus on making money, and then the love for the camera never left. So it was like, okay, I'm gonna still do my thing. And then it became a point where the camera work and that part of my life eclipsed my need just to sustain myself financially, right? So then I was able to quit. The real reason and the way I quit that job is because after I went to True False and the film played at that festival there, then it was also invited to France. The first time I ever went to Europe was in 2015, and I went to the south of France, Marseille, to play the film at a place called Film Marseille. And I went to my boss. I said, oh, I made a film and it's doing pretty well, and I was invited to go play it in France. Can I take like 3 weeks off? And I used all my holiday, vacation, sick time, all of that just to go to this festival. I came back to work, but I couldn't really focus because now I had seen too much. You know what I mean? It's like I'd been out of prison and now I seen there's a whole world. So I was like, damn, now I'm back in prison. How am I going to escape? And then like 2 or 3 months later, that film was invited to Copenhagen. And CPH Docs, a big film festival in Copenhagen. And I was at a crossroads. I was like, okay, this is the jumping off moment. This is where I have to quit now because I don't have any holiday time. I first asked my boss for like a leave of absence, an unpaid leave of absence. And he was like, no. He was like, listen, man, it's time for you to just focus on your work. And these guys were supportive. And honestly, that's what I did. I just jumped off from that point. And that's the thing, man. Like, you know, there's support out there for you. You know what I mean? There's people just waiting for you to take that jump in life so they can support you. Had I never done that, I wouldn't have worked with Khalil Joseph, with Lemonade and all of that, right? It's almost like when you're in a relationship sometimes and like you're breaking up, but you're wondering like what's going to happen afterwards. Sometimes you just got to break up. It's going to be a little rough, you know what I mean? But then you'll find somebody else, or maybe you just need to be single for a while. Maybe I made some of my best work when I was single. Not to get deep personally, but I'm just saying, for real. Good question, man.
I think that also just speaks a little bit to the fact of the big world out there. This program at NYU. No, it's okay. This program at NYU tends to be very U.S. focused, both in terms of how it encourages you to make work and also what kind of opportunities exist in the world. And this sort of your career really, and the past, you know, many months of your life when you've been touring Europe. But there's a whole nother, you know, style of making films abroad. We have a lot of international students here. So I just encourage you to look at those other models as well. Your work has been so well received internationally. And in a way, maybe more, you know, it's been more inclusive of the kind of things you want to make and in terms of their level of support. I don't know if you want to speak about that a little bit.
Like that film did well, better in Europe than in America, you know, because over there, a 3-hour film is not that much, right? They watch 4 or 5 hour films. That's actually why I made it, because like in the beginning, my films were short films, then 60 minutes, then 70 minutes, right? But I remember when I went to Spain, I was so tired, but they took me straight to the cinema and I fell asleep in like a red velvet chair in the back of the back wall of a cinema. And when I woke up, the movie was still playing. And I was like, damn, but it was like a warm chair, warm velvet, and it was like bright lights coming off and the music was playing. And I felt so good, like, damn, okay, I'm awake. I'm in Spain, damn. So then I was like, I want to give someone the same experience where I make a film where you don't got to be attached to every detail, right? You could watch it and just catch a piece of it, right? And it's holographic. Like, think about this. The universe is holographic. It's like the piece contains the whole and the whole contains the piece. It's like you. You contain all of your DNA and a little piece of your DNA contains all of you. So I was making work that was holographic where you could watch just 10 minutes of the film and feel like you got the whole thing. That was the idea. You know what I mean? So in that sense, it could be 3 hours. Like I was saying, film is a new art form. So be willing to take risk with your work where you take these departures from what has been successful before. Like I can continuously make films like my earlier films because that kind of was successful and maybe that's what people expect, but I don't think I'd be satisfied. I think I'd have to continue to do something different, to evolve.
We have a mutual friend, Anna Zemeka, who made a beautiful docu-fiction film called Communion, which was a documentary, but it was actually all scripted out and shot in 30 days.
Wow.
By non-actors, by the people it was about themselves, but following really a narrative process. In Europe, that film won the biggest award equivalent to the Oscars. It was played on television regularly, and to this day, almost many years later, she still receives monthly payments for when it gets aired on TV through the sales agent. But she could not get U.S. distribution. We tried through our distributor, Grasshopper. We tried through every kind of boutique art house distributor. They wouldn't take it. But it's still doing incredibly well overseas. So I think there's something important to remember that it might not be you. It might just be, the audience you've selected or the region, and that there's just so many different models of filmmaking. We did a Dominican symposium last spring, and that's a completely different model of film financing. So, really explore what these models are, and we're all, up here, I think the three of us are really encouraging you all to not be in a prison of the U.S. model, because there's a lot of other ways of doing things.
We briefly spoke about spirituality earlier, and kind of expect an abstract answer to an abstract question. But so often I see from what I've seen in your work is you preach of this light in people, this non-tactile quality in which maybe you can't see or there's no sense or feeling to describe it, but it's there in people. And you've gone all around the world. You started in New York, you went to New Orleans, you went to Germany, and I see that there's almost this, something that really stood out to me is you just posted up at a gas station in New Orleans and you tried to replicate the same feeling as what it was like to be on 125th in Lexington. Can you help describe, as much as you can, right, what this light is in people, what you see, what makes their stories, because I see in your work, you're almost like a divine messenger of these really underrepresented stories. What is it in those people, beyond what they look like, beyond their story, beyond everything? What is this like?
It's the essence. It's the essence. Growing up in the 5% nation, we have a saying when a person passes away, they return to the essence. They went back to their essence. So we don't really regard this world as our home. Right, this is a place where we are temporarily, in a sense, almost acting out a role. Right, we're all characters in a dream world. This is my worldview. So again, I don't expect everyone to agree, but this is just the way that I see it. You know what I mean? So the essence is the essence of what you really are. Right, which is not something that is vulnerable, not something that ages and decays. Right, not something that is prey to sickness and disease and death and so on and so forth. those are the ego dynamics, essentially. Like everybody in this world, including myself, we all have an ego. The ego is basically the idea that we're separate from each other. It's a separate identity, you know what I mean? Where, okay, the name of my ego was Khalik. This is a separate entity, but in reality, we're all one. We're all connected, right? You know, we don't have that sense because we're so narrow. Our consciousness is narrowed down to our ego, so we see the world through our own perspective, which is separate from everybody else's. But you could change all of this by understanding that the interest of others is your own interest. You see, this is a world of separate interests that we live in now. That's why it's a war planet. Because you got beings over here whose interest is separate from this other country, and then they go to war because they both believe in scarcity. So if they have, then I don't have. If I have, then they don't have. And that creates this dynamic of competition, which is prevalent in this world. But that's insane. That's why, you know, in the Bible, you know, Jesus says, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. Now, that's a literal thing. It's not like you're somebody else. The fact is, what I do to you, I'm doing to myself. I don't realize that because my perspective is narrowed to my ego. But believe me, if I do something to you, I'm literally doing it to myself. So I have the power to see the light in you or the darkness. One is real, one doesn't even exist. Because fear in itself is illusionary. All fear is an illusion. You know, it seems real though. You know, only love exists. Only love is real. But we live in a world where we disowned love. We said to get lost. We told it, we're afraid of love. Everybody in this world is love. We have a substitute for love in this world. And when I talk about love, I don't just mean what happens between two people in a romantic sense. I mean unconditional, absolute reality, which is what we really are. But we don't know what we are. We think that we're the home of sin, guilt, and fear. Essentially, you know how many people live in guilt, you know what I mean, throughout their entire life, not knowing that there's no need to do that. So basically, when I see the light in another person, I'm reinforcing it within myself. And that's how I elevate through the atmosphere and get past this dimension. That's how you really leave this dimension, really. But many don't want to leave. Many just want to stay here. You know what I mean? I'm trying to live in the essence while I'm even in this illusionary world. So I don't need to physically pass away to be in a heavenly state of mind, right? Now, when I'm talking to you is something that I realized. I'm not telling you that you must agree with me. I know I'm standing before you, sitting before you with professors over here, and it's love. It's all love. But I'm just telling you what I think, so you figure it out for yourself. But believe me, the proof is in the pudding, man. You know what I mean? If you practice forgiveness, you know, forgiveness is the key to happiness. Forgiveness is the way to elevate beyond this illusionary world. And when I say forgiveness, I just mean seeing past illusions. You know what I mean? Because this is a world of symbols. Even the words I'm using are reflective of concepts. So they're symbols of symbols. So they're twice removed from reality. Reality is immediate. You don't need symbols to break it down, to reflect it, you know what I mean? Or to express it, right? So even the way we communicate is unnatural. Communication naturally is telepathic, immediate. You know exactly what I'm thinking. I don't have to use words. But here with the ego, which we all have, and that's why this world here is an experience of separation, which is impossible. So ultimately, the world doesn't even exist.
I mean, we've talked a lot about like your spirituality, and you mentioned at one point that your spirituality really informs your work. But does the reverse ever happen where you feel like the work that you're doing will like inform your spirituality and some subject or something you're really putting yourself into will transform your spirituality in some way?
Totally, man. Great question. Thank you, man. Yeah, let's put it this way. We're all babies. We're all babies here. Even a 60-year-old man with advanced wisdom is still a child. We're all babies here in this life, so I don't have all the answers. You know what I mean? I'm still a baby myself, who's growing, who's maturing. You see, when you're born into this world, you're born as a baby and you grow physically until what, 21, 22, something like that, 18, right? So that's when your physical growth ends, but your psychological, spiritual, mental growth is continuous. At least it's supposed to be for your entire life here, right? So the work I make, I learn from. You know what I mean? When I filmed that woman giving birth in Black Mother, when I went through the process of making that film and the difficulty of being on the ground in Jamaica, that film was a very difficult project to make. When I went through all of that, it made me stronger. It gave me more faith, even in other people, right? And even in myself, understanding my ability more, learning more about trust, right? Of course, the work I do helps to develop me psychologically and spiritually because I work with people. Anytime you work with people, you learn a lot from them. You know what I mean? It's like therapy, my work, honestly. It's like therapy. And the reality is we're all each other's therapist and patient. I'm your patient and therapist at the same time. I'm your student and you're my teacher, and I'm your teacher and student at the same time. It's simultaneous, right? So when you work with people in the documentary world, I mean, the things that you learn, you just got to have an open mind, right? And you have to be receptive and sensitive and go into it in a humble state of mind. You know, if you look at the film IWOW, there's elements of that where I'm not being humble. There was elements where I was really feeling myself in that film. You know what I mean? Which could kind of be off-putting. Shevaun could tell you, but I appreciate that she understands me so well that she still got love for me to invite me here. Because when I put that film out at the end, I was like, damn, did I go too far? Like what? You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I think that people will decide for themselves. Right? And like I said, take the best part from anything. You could read a book and only really love one chapter, or you could read a poem and it just be one line of that poem that you love, right? Don't throw the whole poem away because the rest of it you didn't really feel. Yeah. That one line may become something that you lean on in your life. You know what I mean? You don't have to read the whole Bible. You may read just Proverbs, right? And you may like some part of Proverbs, and that becomes something that you go to, right? Or you may not read the Bible at all. You may read the Dhammapada or the Upanishads or some Indian text. Or you may, you know, see, the religions are like the water companies, man. You got Poland Spring, Evian, Aquafina, Dasani, right? But they all contain water, right? So if you find a pure spring of water coming out the ground, it doesn't need to be in the bottle of a specific brand. You know what I mean? Just drink the water. We all need water. You know what I mean?
As you described the process, it seems like a pretty solitary one, and I was wondering, do you have like an inner circle? Is there anybody you're talking to and showing this stuff to while you're working on it?
Totally, man. My little brother, you know, I got a younger brother who has come with me to Jamaica, and I didn't really have a crew, but he was my assistant pretty much, carrying gear, helping me. Also, when I worked on Lemonade, he was there. And that was cool because, like, Pulse, which was the production company during that project, they said, yo, do you need an assistant, you know, like on the ground? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, do you have someone in mind? And I was just thinking, like, keep the money in the family. Like, let me get my little brother a job. He's not a professional, but I brought him in, and he was on that project with me. And he's somebody who, when I was beginning, before anybody even knew my name, right, at all, I would show him rough cuts. You know, there was a time when I was making Field Niggas at the beginning of that project, and I was just playing the audio through like iTunes, and I was looking at the video in QuickTime. And he came into my studio and was like, what are you doing? I'm like, nah, this is something that I just shot. I'm just listening to the audio as I look at the visuals. And he was like, yo, make the whole film like that. And he's the one who why I made it out of sync like that, because I was like, damn, that's a good idea. This was just a random encounter when he came into my studio, and I was like, oh, okay, you know, and then that kind of became my style. So, you know, when I was there's a town in Long Island called Bellport, and Bellport is that cliche, like the other side of the tracks, because there's the hood, then there's the really rich side, right? But I was always buying weed in the hood. You know what I mean? I grew up between there and another town called Patchogue. And there was a guy that sold weed who had a DVD player. He was the only guy with a DVD player. I didn't own a DVD player. So I would go to him with like rough cuts of my music videos and be like, yo, can I watch this? And then he would be sitting down smoking weed older guy too. And he would just be like, oh, that's dope, and encouraging me, right? These are people I'll never forget, man. There's another guy who was an engineer at a community college I was at. His name was Larry. And during the summer, he would let me in to edit. The school was closed. He would let me in there just into the editing suite. And this is a time when I used to smoke so much weed. I must have been smelling like weed so much. And he never, ever said anything to me about that. He just let me. He was like, okay, here you go. You know, here's the editing suite. Here's, you know, he used his key, let me in there. So there's always been people, you know what I mean, that are like angels to me, man, who I wouldn't be here before you today without them.
Hi, so in Alfonso's class, we've been reading your interview and the homesickness theme. And at one point you talked about your camera having a magnetism, like between the camera and your collaborator, like Freddie, and it made me want to like ask your thoughts on like the idea of cinematography kind of as a performance and the whole thing, because I find that like especially when shooting handheld, it feels like every jitter, every shake, like the speed at which you hold focus, the like when to pan and such, it all feels like performance decisions almost. Like the camera itself is also an actor, and I was just wondering like what your thoughts on like the role of the camera in such a way is like, is it like on the same playing field as like the subject, the performer themselves?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for that question. And that's a meaningful question to me because yes, the camera is like a microphone in a sense. Like I'm more inspired not by other filmmakers really, but more so by music. You know what I mean? And I was growing up around a lot of rappers, but I was never able to rap. You know what I'm saying? So for me, when I picked up the camera, it's like I became a visual MC. So the camera itself is a part of like me, my eye, in a melodic way, in a musical way. I look at the camera as a musical instrument as well. Even when I got into photography, I really began to look at it like, okay, why does this have to just be a mechanical device that takes pictures? Why can't this be considered like a saxophone or a trumpet, right? I love Miles Davis. I love John Coltrane. So I was thinking about the camera as being more than just these are the kind of abstractions that you should make in your mind to kind of open your mind up in different ways. Don't just lock into what is ordinary or usually accepted or whatever. Think way outside of the frame. And yeah, with my work, if you notice, I don't use a lot of music in my films, right? So the films find their own rhythm. And a lot of that has to do with the camera itself and the way that I handle it, right? And then when I'm editing, to speak technically for a moment, like I do what I call a video cut down. My little brother told me, no, people call that selects. I don't care what you call it. Call it selects, video cut down, whatever. But I'll look at all my video that I shot, go through it, and then chop it, even before I know how I'm going to use it. And I'll put that on a timeline, like a sequence timeline in Premiere. So I'll have all of this rough video that I don't really know where it's going to be placed in the film, but I like the way that it begins and ends, certain edits, certain chops, right? This is 5 seconds. This is 10 seconds. This is a 3-second cut, something like that. And then I'll just, later on, as I work on the audio, then I'll find a place to put that, because a lot of my work is out of sync. So it has to do with creating an association between what you see and what you hear, right? And in that sense, I invite the audience to participate with the film, right? So you have to form your own association between what you're hearing and what you're seeing. And that's similar to when you read a book. When you read a book, a novel, you make mental images in your mind as you're reading. And I wanted people to feel that same way with the film, right? In the sense of participating with the film, right? So I do lead the narrative, of course, and I create a rhythm. I create a space for them to draw their own idea of what it is they're watching. And in that way, even though it's very subjective, my work, it's coming from one man, I'm editing it myself, but then it becomes like so subjective, it becomes objective. Because I created all of this, but I lend it to the audience to form their own idea, right? In filmmaking, there's something called forced narrative. And forced narrative is kind of like what when you're holding the audience's hand and telling them what to think. Sometimes that could be text that comes up in the movie or something. I try to avoid forced narrative. I don't want to force the narrative at all. You know what I mean? But that fits for this type of work that I'm doing, which is documentary. I wouldn't even say experimental, because experimental implies you don't really know what you're doing. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I don't like experimental. I feel like I'm intentional, but it's abstract. I prefer the word abstract. But yes, the camera itself is like a musical device. It's a very important thing. And this is also why, as I branch out now, I'm being careful about working with other cinematographers. I'm trying to find cinematographers who I feel like I could work with, who have a similar aesthetic as well. Because I can't continue to just shoot everything the way that I have been these years, you know?
Good evening and peace. Khalik, you mentioned a lot about how you weren't formally trained and you never went to school. However, you talked about the last several years, you spent a lot of time actually teaching in schools throughout the world. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that, you know, it was time to stop and retool, and you referenced some of the things that you do, nature, night walks, etc. Now that you talked about it's time for you to retool, and you know what you do spiritually and to get yourself socially and emotionally up, what's going to be your next form of school? Where are you going to school next? And who will be your teachers?
That's a deep, yo, this is a deep brother over here. You know what I mean? Yo, I don't know, honestly, man. I mean, the thing is, as I mentioned, I want to do fiction films. I've never done that. I kind of want to like start reading more again. Reading is key. You know, I don't read as much as I used to. I used to read so many books. Now I'm not, I read a little bit now, but I want to open my mind up to doing more reading and just kind of like meditating more, thinking about what I want to do, learning from other cinematographers. Like I was saying, it's not just about selecting somebody, it's also learning from really technical guys. There's so much talent out there. I don't know everybody's work in this room, but I would venture to say there's extraordinary talent among us, even in this room right now, in terms of cinematography and stuff. And like, you know, I may work with some of y'all at some point on something, who knows? So I need to kind of like just catch a breath from all of the traveling I was doing, and then remember. That's where I've really been at, trying to remember that I'm just beginning, keeping a child mind, keeping a beginner's mind, and then thinking about, as I was saying earlier, people like Larry Clark, who made films later in life, right? Painters, musicians, people that are like still making work. I love the rapper Nas because he made 6 albums since 2020. You know, with a producer named Hit Boy. He just made 6 albums just on the humble, like quickly, like, and this guy's like over the hill in terms of hip hop. Because hip hop, most of the rappers are in their 20s or teenagers or whatever. But to be like LL Cool J just put out an album, right? So, you know, I mean, age, I'm not trying to really just speak about age like it's a real thing. I just told you we're not the body anyway. But I mean, in the sense of like, I want to keep going. That's really what I'm trying to say. Because you could get to a point, like a point similar to what I got to with your career, and then just chill out and just give up and live off the residuals. You know what I mean? And you get checks every now and then coming from certain things. But nah, I want to still develop my mind and then use my work to depict different ideas. And it's real to me. To me, it's not a joke. Like, you know, it's not like a little hobby for me. You know what I mean? For some people, you know, photography is a hobby, and that's cool. Or filmmaking is a hobby. But for me, it's like a way of life. You know, I think in terms of stories. I think in terms of picking up the camera to show aspects of the world that people don't know about. You know, New York City is one of the most famous cities in the world, but a lot of people didn't know about the story of these people living on the sidelines of society, on Lexington Avenue in Harlem, right? So you could take a popular place like the country Jamaica, where Black Mother was made, and it's one of the most popular countries in the world, but that film shows it from the inside out. So it's a whole different perspective, because most of the time when we talk about Jamaica, we're talking about reggae, we're talking about Bob Marley, we're talking about Rastafarianism or marijuana. That film doesn't really deal with those tropes. It goes from a much deeper perspective. So I like to take something that people think they know everything about and show it from a whole different angle, or show it from the inside out, right? So, yeah, man, it's a deep question you asked me, but I'm in the state of just becoming a student, staying a student. After teaching and giving off so much, now I'm like, okay, recharge and pray. Honestly, that's what I do. I feel like I ask for guidance. You know what I mean? There's a book that I read, and one of the statements in it is, I give my life to God today. I give my life to God today. Means that I'm not my own leader. You know what I mean? In the sense of, yeah, I'm a leader, but I'm asking for higher advice beyond what I could presently know. You know what I mean? I call upon my grandmother, my deceased relatives, my grandfather, who I was very close with. Me and my grandma, we used to sit on the couch and watch Ricky Lake, holding hands. You know what I'm saying? When I was a kid. So there's a transference that happens between a grandmother or a grandfather and a grandchild, and I was blessed to have that with me. I also feel like that helped me mature. But also, I used to work in nursing homes, so there's a lot of wisdom out there if you just ask. Some of the films that you all are going to make, go speak to your grandparents. Ask them for some advice, and they'll give you the missing link. You know what I mean? So, yeah, man, it's just about keeping an open mind, man, and remembering that we're all babies, that we're all children, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you, God.
We hope to see you out at the reception and at future events. Thank you so much. Thank you.